From the boardroom to the highest peak in the world, this is the story of Saray Khumalo. Welcome to Women in Sport Africa. And as I've said, today we get to know another trailblazer that has summited Mount Everest amongst all the other incredible things that she has done. But today we take it back all the way to where she grew up until the incredible work that she did from Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Everest, and the 7 Summits Challenge. You don't want to miss this. And today we get to uncover the woman behind the mountain. Saray Khumalo, thank you so much for joining us. And I think in the number of interviews I've watched leading up to our conversation, I don't think there's anyone that's really touched on where you come from. And I feel like that forms such an integral part of your story. Let's start with your early years in Zaire, which is now the DRC, where you grew up with your grandparents.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I was born in Lusaka, Zambia, and obviously grew up with my grandparents in the DRC. It was called Zaire at the time. Until I was 13, I thought they were my parents, my grandmother and my grandfather. I called them Mama and Papa. Yeah. And I was the youngest because it was uncles and aunties. And there was this auntie that used to bring me toys. That turned out to be my mom. But it was such a happy childhood. I was a tomboy. I played outside. I had a bike. My grandmother was the only old lady that I knew that had a bike. So I used to play with her bike until I got my own bike. It was all about really playing in the streets, you know, and but making sure that you're not naughty because the neighbors can punish you as much as the people at home. Yes. But it was such a happy childhood. One of the things, talking about mountains, that we had at home was I used to think it was a big mountain behind the house. Now when I look back, it probably was a molehill behind the house that I would climb on and you know, really look at our roof, the roofs of our neighbors, and wonder what was out there. I think that was my curiosity, even though I didn't know it at the time.
Yes, yes. And I mean, looking at being back at home, your grandfather being part of the Seventh-day Adventists. Yes. And as I read your book, by the way, My Journey to the Top of the World, I noticed the amount of impact that your grandmother and your grandfather had. Yes. But also then you moved to live with your mom in Zambia, as you were saying, when you were 13, and having to navigate that change because now it's completely different worlds from the village to the township. Yes,
yes. Oh, wow. So that was, thank you for reading my book, first of all. So that was quite a shift because suddenly I wasn't the youngest. I had siblings that were younger than me, and I was in a world that wasn't really protected. You know, I couldn't speak the local language, Kinyanja, so kids can be nasty. They would laugh at your accent, you know, and I learned to protect my siblings. I wasn't being protected anymore. And it was, the township was different, but also the way my mom parented was totally different to my grandparents. You know, with my grandmother, I would sit by the fire. She would tell me stories. My mom had no time for that.
She was a businesswoman. She was busy.
She had no time for that. And suddenly, I found myself being the person that everybody went to if there was a noise by the windows in the middle of the night. Sarah, come in. Like, I don't know what I would have done, but, you know, it was me. And I felt like I must go check it out. It's fine, you know. So it was a different world. It was also a world where my mom made it very clear that because you're a girl, the world may treat you differently. Yeah. You don't have to accept it.
And those lessons for you came particularly early because still in your book, I remember there was a time where a boy bullied you. You ran home to go hide under a bed and your uncle gave you the most important words that if someone bullies you, bully them back, or in fact, you be the one.
He said to me, if you come back running and hiding in the bed again, I am going to hit you. So you must, deal with it. Or that bully. The next time he tried it and I stood up to him, first of all, I think he was shocked, not that I was any stronger than he was.
Yes.
And that was the end of it, and I wasn't afraid anymore to go to, it was like a stadium, a soldiers camp where they did like drums and everybody would go there. And this boy had put the fear in me that I must be at home when everybody else is out there. And that was a big lesson. I think for me, what Uncle Festo did for me was really to tell me that I don't have to take anybody's nonsense. I don't have to allow people to bully me. It's not them being bullies, it's me allowing the bullying to myself. So that was a big lesson. And I took that when I went to Lusaka. And I kind of tried to protect my sisters, my younger sisters, using the same mentality. And it's been like that. It's easy for me to stand my ground, but I also at the same time, I can't stand injustice. It has nothing to do with me, but I find myself calling it out. Sometimes gets me into trouble, of course.
And it naturally will. I mean, especially from a woman who happens to be black too. There's always that double whammy. But in that, I think also the inspiration does come from your mom, because she was living in a house with these 7 girls. There was no time for her to be intimidated by everything that's happening in the village. And that characteristic in her was already birthed in you too.
Absolutely. And even, like there's a township meeting. For whatever reason, they used to say, the men come to the meeting. And my mom is like, I'm the man and the woman. So she would go. Apart from the men feeling like, why is Helen here? Their wives had issues with that. So it will filter down. You pick these things up. And it was also very evident that my mom was clear that we were not going to end up there, all of us.
Sure.
So she took us to the right side of town, if I may call it the right side of town, in terms of education. And it was ingrained in all of us that where we belong is where we want to be and not where we are. Our past doesn't determine our future in any way.
Sure.
And I've lived that. And
where we belong is where we want to be and not where we are. In fact, just as we started this episode, I was saying to Saray Khumalo, I wish I could sit with a notepad every time I'm sitting with you, because these gems just come so naturally from her. But we are sitting with Saray Khumalo, the first black woman to summit Mount Everest, African at that. And when we come back, we get to know her story a lot more. Coming back after Wiser. Welcome back to Women in Sport Africa, and today we're sitting with a pioneer, a woman that showed all of us how possible it is to do almost anything in the world, and she did summit Mount Everest, and one of the only, in fact, the only African woman to complete the 7 Summits Challenge. Sarah, we'll get to the summits, the peaks, so to speak, but we're pretty much still just getting to know the story behind Saray Khumalo and the influences at home that have gotten you to where you are today. So I still want to go back home to your grandparents' house, where your grandfather, as we said earlier on, was a priest and you were part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Pathfinders was the club that you were part of at school, at church rather. So take us back to Pathfinders, because in a way, it feels like those were the seeds planted for you to eventually be summiting mountains or to get to that adventurous side.
Absolutely. So you were right in saying at school, because I went to an Adventist school in my primary school. So there was a blurry version between school and church, really. But one of the things that they did so well, apart from making you memorize verses, know things about people in the Bible, who they are, what they did, was to teach you survival. So we went camping, we would do like matching, we would do community service, But what impacted me the most was the camping and the hiking, although we didn't call it that. So we would go for at least 2 weeks per year. That was the biggest one, the longest holiday in the year. You're kind of excited to get there. When you get there, it's work, work, work. It's really, they leave you in the middle of nowhere. You must figure out how to get to camp on your own. Really survival skills. They were, and we didn't have tents like we do now. It's using the trees, like the branches, the grass to make, mattresses, to make shelter. We cooked ourselves, so it was like rough.
It was
and
very
you
rough.
Absolutely hated it. And then you get home, you're like, oh my God, when are we going back? You know?
In retrospect, do you look at that era of your life and say, it's actually a critical point because it taught me so much as well?
Absolutely. You know, when I was going through, I suppose people would say midlife crisis after I lost my older sister, I went back to, who am I? You know, and you know, you get to a point, at least I got to a point where I was boss lady at work, Malugazana at home, mom and whatever, but who is Sarah really? And in order to find me, I went back to those things that just made me feel free, made me feel me. I did them because they made me happy. So it was almost intrinsic rather than extrinsic. I wasn't doing it for other people, for me.
Yes.
And I think that was the inner child in me. I was happy, I was free. You know, you get to a river, you like put the bags down, no one is watching until, you know, the leader comes and say,
What's
pack
happening?
Up, you know. And I guess that's why I love hiking. You can be many of you on the trail, but you really find yourself within the moment on the hike, on the mountain rather.
But one of the other critical lessons to come from your childhood is the life of service.
Oh, yes.
And
Absolutely.
again, you take that throughout, but from a young age, you're surrounded by people that give.
Yes. So my grandmother was a vegetarian, and she lived until she was, I think, 101. She planted, we planted, I suppose, most of the stuff. We had a garden at home. We had like a garden outside of home, just outside of the small town. And we planted more than we needed: maize, groundnuts, sweet potatoes, and all sorts, and even soybeans. And any extras was given to people in church, people in the community that needed it. That was, you know, my grandfather would always say, which I didn't understand as a kid, that if you don't live a life of service, it's a life wasted. You know, and that's how I've decided for the past few years, for over a decade now, to just go back to basics. It's really about Ubuntu, which many times when we come to town, we forget about it. We clutch onto this capitalism and, you know, it's about me and me and me, but you know, nobody gets to the top alone. But at the same time, not everybody can be your partner, you know.
Let's talk about the transition then from your childhood to the idea of the first thing I'm going to do is climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yes.
When does that bridge connect?
That is actually, I say I'm an accidental mountaineer because in 96, I think, I visited the US. At the time, I was crazy about going to America. I had watched Coming to America, I think a year or so before then with Eddie Murphy, and everything American was it. You know, I just wanted to go to And I rock up there and I get questions like, do you know my friend in Nigeria? And all sorts of crazy questions that we all are probably familiar with. And that made me realize that, no, they're not as clever as the movie, you know, portrayed them to be. You know, as an African, I felt like I knew more, you know, and it was a lot of aha moments that made me appreciate who I am and where I come from. Until one brother, an African-American, asked me to say, have you done Kilimanjaro? And I said, no. Boy, he went to town about it. And I said, that should be my story. You know, so it became something on my bucket list. That was 96. I only went to Kili 2012. So I lost my older sister 2009. I started trying to find me, right? And I went back to things that I did when I was young. I went back to my grandfather saying, live a life of service. And I wanted to give back. I wanted everything I did to be impactful. And that journey led me to Kili. We did Kili because it was on my bucket list, but used it to raise money for a home in Benoni called Kids Heaven.
Yes.
And that really changed my life without me realizing it. I came back, we raised enough, built an outdoor gym for Kids Heaven, converted a room into a library, and a kid in the home said to me, do you really come from the township?
Sure.
And initially I thought it was a joke, do black people swim? All these stereotypes that we all carry. And she said, no, people like us don't do things like this. A sense of self-disbelief. Honestly, that I too grew up with, because I thought, going to America is it. Watching Wonder Woman, Superman, they didn't look like me.
Yes.
They didn't talk
you could
like
never
me.
Identify
Absolutely
them.
not.
Yes.
But I knew they were heroes. I must applaud. But I can never be a hero. But travel and education changed my perspective, made me realize that I too can be a superhero. And so looking at my kids, my two boys, I wondered what I needed to do to show them that help comes from within before they looked elsewhere, that they too are superheroes, And so I made a commitment to climb mountains, the 7 highest peaks on the 7 continents, but use it to raise money for education. So that was the birth of Summits with a Purpose.
Sure.
Why climb and take a selfie when I can climb and change my world?
Why climb and take a selfie, whereas you can do the incredible thing of changing the world? And indeed, she has done that. We're having a conversation with Saray Khumalo, the first Black woman to summit Mount Everest. And of course, she goes on to do incredible things in her life. So you don't want to go away, because the conversation continues after the break. Welcome back to Women in Sport Africa, Wiser. And I think in the moments we've shared with Saray Khumalo so far, we truly have grown wiser, Sarah. You're not just a leader, you're a philanthropist, but I think an overall exceptional human being. And it speaks to the importance of where a person comes from. And it's such an important part as Africans, because home truly shapes us. Whatever it looks like, it could be the not fanciest, but truly that's where you get your seeds planted as a person.
Absolutely. I guess they say home is where the heart is. I think it's not about necessarily where you come from only, it's where you choose to make a home. I think many times, if you look at my history, my grandparents, even though they were in the DRC, in Zaire, they actually came from Rwanda. So they came from Rwanda in the 50s. But when we were in Zaire, in Kipushi or in Likasi, which are the small towns in the DRC, that was home. That's all I knew, but it didn't change who they were. We still spoke Kinyarwanda. We spoke the local language at home as well. And I find that many times people fail to, they immigrate and they get into an environment and fail to make it a home. But it's important to make it a home. Otherwise, you fail to almost translate certain values to your offsprings or to your kids, to who they are, because they are always a product of who we are and the product of the environment that they grow in.
So Sarah, you go on a summit of the Mount Kilimanjaro and you raise the funds for Kids Haven, as you've said. Now, how does that then connect to the ambition of going onto Mount Everest?
That was kind of the beginning. And the question from that child from Kids Heaven made me realize that there was more that I could do. I want to climb mountains because it just made me feel free. There was something about summiting Kilimanjaro, even though it was difficult, that touched me in a different way. It also opened the gate to what I could do using what I love doing. So I was going to climb mountains either way, whether I used it to make a difference or not. I was going to do it because I just felt fulfilled. I found me on those trails, and it was a personal journey. Looking at the fact that when I attempted Everest, there was a world there that didn't think as a Black African woman I belonged there, that my ambitions should be to get to the Everest base camp and I must be satisfied. That made me aware of the importance of representation. That if there's a world out there that looks at me as ambitious as I am, as somebody that needs to be pegged at a specific level lower than they expect or that I believe I could, what are they going to do to my kids?
Sure.
You know, and it becomes important for us as a generation to actually hold our own in the spaces that we are responsible for, in the spaces that we are in, because the world will be kinder to our children because we dared to step into those spaces. You know, the reality is you hear people say these people are lazy. It's not because the whole community is lazy. It's because one person showed them that they were lazy and they just blanketed everybody.
Yes.
So the question is, what are they going to say about broadcasting because you sat in that seat?
Those are the questions you need to ask yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I decided that I was going to do Everest. I know once, twice, 4 times, because I knew that those who come after me will be given the same benefit of the doubt that a white male rich on the mountain is given.
And those are the dynamics, Sarah, you'd say at the time. And I think it also speaks to your bravery to believe that you could actually do it. Because even if you watch documentaries of people that summit Mount Everest, it's a certain type of person. And yes, you gave it a different picture with giving that encouragement to more women, but also to more people of color, and not just women, to say that I too could summit Mount Everest.
Absolutely. You know, when I started with Kili and I decided I want to do this, my one-pager website, if I may call it that, said, I'm just an ordinary African woman trying to reach extraordinary heights. When I look back, that was quite apologetic. And now I say, no, I'm uniquely extraordinary. We are all uniquely extraordinary, and being ordinary is a choice. It's when we give in to the voices, to the world that believes that we don't belong, that we remain ordinary. If we step into our own greatness, remain authentically who we are, we too, you know, individually can make history in our own way.
So when it comes, Sarah, as breaking news, the first woman to summit Mount Everest, it always seemed and felt like it was the first. But actually, it was your 4th attempt.
Absolutely.
And when I continue going back to your book, the first attempt had its own challenges, incredible challenges, like loss of people. An attempt had an earthquake where 9,000 people are killed in that earthquake, the remnants of it. Take me through the challenges of these summits leading up to the 4th one.
So the first one, as you rightly pointed out, in 2014, 16 Sherpas died. That was, if there was ever a time that should have or would have given up, was then. One of the things that happened after that avalanche was a sense of survivor's guilt. You know, did they die because I wanted to climb? Sure. And one of the things somebody sent me a message is to say, figure out why you have been spared, and that will inform how best you need to move forward. I don't know whether they thought about that message, but the way I took it was, I was spared for a reason. I have to be intentional. You know, yes, I feel bad that the Sherpas died, and it was all Sherpas. You know, was it their job? Did they love to climb? But I was spared for a reason, and it was their time. And I'm not going to take it for granted. And I came back with all the lessons. I'm obsessed about what did I learn from that? You know, how can I use it to go back and climb better? How intentional do I need to be? Because the reality is my time is also coming, and I'm not going to waste any minute from now going forward. So that was 2014. 2015, earthquake. I was between camp 1 and 2. I mean, if you think about anything, I don't know how we survived. We were the least affected on the mountain. When we came back to Everest Base Camp, our camps were like demolished. Like there was blood everywhere because people really lost their lives at Everest Base Camp. But once again, I survived, Biggest lesson then was how we show up when the world is shaking around us. Because when the earthquake hit, I was between Camp 1 and 2 on the glacier, which was shaking us. And my shepherd turned around, hooked his carabiner into me and said, Sarah, we are jumping. So the idea was, if the ground we were walking on, the glacier, opened up, we needed to jump onto the same side. Because if we jumped on opposite side, one of us would pull the other one in. And I remember just watching him. It felt like 5 minutes, but it was less than 2 minutes. And it stopped. As soon as it stopped, we were sandwiched really by mountains. Numtse, Lhotse, and Everest. Those mountains started avalanching towards us. They're more scary. Like you hear it before you see it. Rocks, ice, everything coming at you. And he just started praying. So he started praying. He's a Tibetan, the Nawang, and he started praying, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is like a chant, which I knew it was a chant because I saw them praying, burning incense. And I remember just watching him and thinking, boy, he's scared. He's praying to his God. I'm a Christian. Like he's praying for himself. I'm not included. And it's really a different Nawang that showed up when he said we're jumping and I was going to follow him, knowing that we wouldn't have made it, knowing what I know today, to the one that was scared. Because he was scared and I was like, no, I don't know that God. I'm going, Jesus, what's the plan?
Yes.
Which is funny, but it's actually not. It's very rich. It's really saying, how do we show up as a community, as mothers, as sisters, as leaders, when the world is shaking around us? Very recently we had COVID. How did different leaders show up?
And how did it change us as a people?
Yeah, and 2017 I go back, I almost die in the death zone. Was frostbitten. I lost consciousness. That was the second time I actually not almost gave up, I gave up. I remember waking up and looking at Everest. I went 99 meters from the top, so close and yet so far. And the shepherds thought I was dead. They came, they were pulling to try and put me on the stretcher, and then I woke up and I spoke like, oh, you're alive. And then I'm like, yeah, but I'm hungry. I hadn't eaten for almost 30 hours, and that, me getting up and looking at Everest, I wondered if all those people that said I didn't belong, were right. So when your naysayers' voices become loud in your head, then you're in trouble.
I'm going to cap it there, Sarah, because I feel like we've reached base 1 and base 2, and we're still going on this summit and the story of Saray Khumalo, a philanthropist, a leader, an activist, and an all-round incredible woman. And I think that embodies the typical African woman. It's so layered. It's so incredible to watch and learn. And that's the first part with Saray Khumalo. The second comes in because we still need to summit Mount Everest and get to the peak, and the story of Saray Khumalo continues. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back again next week, Sunday at 12:30 right here on SABC2.